open, and so you're adding more diversity by having these different habitats throughout this 200-hectare property. And here you have an open area of tallgrass prairie, and originally, so this was all sand originally, and what happens is they would till and prepare the site. And you can still see here there's a lot of sand remaining in open spots. And so basically this was a completely open field, and they came in and they collected all the seeds for these different species from different areas that were representative of the habitat that they wanted to create, and then they brought them all together. So there's thousands of pounds of prairie grass seed in here, hundreds of pounds of oak seed, hundreds of plants of the American hazelnut, and hundreds of plants of sumac. So there's this whole variety of different species that they're trying to have the most representative example of: 1, tallgrass prairie, 2, oak savanna, and then transitioning it back into the temperate forest. So having this mosaic allows more species to exist within this zone, and having all these different transitions back and forth creates a lot more ecotones. And eventually you're trying to fill in this whole area to allow for it to return back into the temperate forest. And so the ecosystem services that you're creating here are obviously more area for different wildlife species, and having all these different habitats within one area creates more biodiversity. And you've got your insects, your birds, you've got turkeys, you've got deer, you've got a whole variety of different organisms that are using this area that wouldn't have used an agricultural area. And increasing the biodiversity not only of the plants but of the soil, and working with the damaged soil, you're also creating what's called biocrusts. So as the soil begins to repair itself, it actually starts to get a crust of things like lichens and mosses and fungi and algae on the top of that. And we can take a look at that. So this area is what you consider a biocrust. So it's lichens and mosses growing on the surface of the soil, and because it's a very inorganic soil, very light soil, then this is beginning the repair process. It's that the grasses can't even grow in this area because it's so nutrient poor. And so these are beginning the process of restoring the soil, creating a little bit of organic matter out of an area that doesn't have any. And the initial process is a chemical process, breaking down the sand, which you can see here, into nutrients that are available. And because lichens have photosynthesis as well, they're working with an algae, and the moss has photosynthesis, so they're able to use the limited nutrients that are there, and they're not growing super tall. As you can see, they're very low, so there's not a lot of nutrients in there, and so they create what's called a biocrust. So it's a very thin crust over the soil. The roots don't go very deep into the soil either, and it's a very fragile ecosystem, but it's also an essential part of restoring the health of the soil. It's the kind of the first step in a very degraded system to restoring the soil. So the techniques that they were using to restore this ecosystem, the prairie grasses, the prairie wildflowers, all these different grassland species were seeded with what's called a truax seeder. You can also hand broadcast the seed yourself if you're using a smaller area, but once you get into a really large area like that, like this, you need to use a piece of mechanical equipment to seed large areas because it takes too much time walking. And the oak species and the American hazel that have a larger seed, they went around and they developed a planting system, which is basically a furrow is dug, and then you have a tube and you drop it down behind the furrow that's being created, and then there's two wheels behind, and it closes the hole. So it's a very simple planter system, and you're just dropping these nuts in, and they would have the tractor driver going in a random pattern all over the property rather than going in straight lines. They were trying to create a much more natural look to it. Some of these acorns could be planted, and then going back in for a lot of these oak trees, they were seeding some of them, and they were planting in these different pods to try to create different habitats in different areas. Some areas they were broadcast seeding the sumac and different species of sumac, pioneer species. So there's a whole variety of different techniques that they were using to restore this ecosystem and try to get it kick-started, especially on such a degraded site.
Thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Your support keeps these videos free for everyone.